The Young and the Restless spoilers recap Tuesday, the 31st of March 2026. There are some nights in Las Vegas when the city does not merely tempt people into bad decisions, it strips them down to the most dangerous versions of themselves, and dares them to pretend it is liberation. That is the atmosphere hanging over this chapter of The Young and the Restless, where glitter becomes camouflage, desire becomes leverage, and every private weakness looks like an opening for someone else to exploit. What makes this storyline especially potent is that it does not depend on one single villain moving pieces around the board. It depends on several people arriving in the same emotional territory from different directions. Adam circling old instincts he has never truly buried. Nick sinking deeper into self-destruction while telling himself he is still in control. Sienna discovering that jealousy can feel humiliating, even when it is justified, and Matt drawing closer like a patient predator who understands that broken people are easiest to handle when they have already begun betraying themselves. The result is not just suspense, it is the slow poisonous thrill of watching pride, fear, and obsession feed each other until nobody involved can claim innocence anymore. Nikki should have kicked Victor out and she should have stayed. Diane had no reason to leave Jack. He was drugged. Diane, what don't you understand about that? Stupid writers. What other old characters will the writers bring back? Snapper, the Brooks sisters. We want more young people on Young and the Restless. Where are Faith, Moses, Christian, etc.? The first and perhaps most fascinating element in all of this is Adam. There has always been something dangerous about Adam when he stops trying to appear healed and starts leaning into the version of himself that thrives in darkness, improvisation, and emotional warfare. The so-called spider side of him is not simply about confidence at a blackjack table or the swagger of a man who knows how to read a room. It is about a persona built on appetite calculation and the willingness to become whatever the moment demands if it means survival or dominance. In Las Vegas, that persona feels almost inevitable. The city rewards masks, and Adam has always been most effective when he treats identity as a tool instead of a truth. At first, his game goes badly enough to remind him that control cannot be faked forever. He is off balance, too visible, a little too restrained. Then something shifts. He stops playing like Adam Newman, a man burdened by history and family expectation, and starts playing like Spider, the version of himself that knows charm can be a weapon and risk can be a language. That change matters because it gives him access to Riza in a way his more recognizable self never could. Riza is not the kind of woman who seems impressed by sincerity alone. She is drawn to nerve to mystery, to the hint that someone sitting across from her may be hiding more than he is saying. Spider gives Adam that edge. Suddenly, he is not just another wealthy man wandering through a casino trying to look composed. He becomes someone electric, someone whose unpredictability invites curiosity rather than suspicion. The chemistry of that dynamic is useful, but it is also dangerous because Adam's problem has never been that he cannot perform darkness convincingly. His problem is that performance has a way of becoming permission. Once he taps into that side of himself, he does not merely wear it like a jacket he can take off later. It starts to seep into his decisions, his tone, his instincts. That is why this storyline has real psychological bite. Adam may begin using Spider as a method to get close to Riza and learn whether she has ties to Matt, but the longer he inhabits that alter ego, the more likely he is to enjoy the freedom it gives him. And that enjoyment is where the danger truly begins. Adam has always had a complicated relationship with his own damage. He resents being reduced to it, yet he also knows it is one of the sources of his power. Spider is seductive because Spider does not apologize, does not hesitate, does not second guess. Spider does not carry the weight of family disappointment or the endless burden of trying to prove he has changed. Personally, that is why I find Adam compelling in stories like this. He is never more interesting than when growth and regression become almost indistinguishable. On the surface, he is advancing the mission, getting closer to answers, reading Riza, positioning himself near the center of the web. But under that surface is a more troubling truth. Each victory achieved through Spider makes it harder for Adam to convince himself he really wants to be better. If becoming darker gets results faster, why would the wounded part of him not start arguing that darkness is simply the more honest version of who he is? While Adam is playing with transformation, Nick is already in the middle of collapse. His situation is uglier because it carries less glamour and far more humiliation. There is nothing seductive about the direction he is headed. The fentanyl, the heavy painkillers, the secret transactions with drug runners, the growing desperation disguised as functionality, all of it paints a picture of a man who is no longer coping so much as managing the optics of his breakdown. Nick has always been one of those men who relies heavily on the illusion of steadiness. Even when he is angry, reckless, or emotionally cornered, he likes to believe he is the practical one, the brother with a stronger grip on reality, the Newman, who can move through chaos without becoming consumed by it. That self-image is exactly why his addiction spiral feels so brutal. It is not just a physical dependency story. It is a story about identity rotting from the inside while the person suffering still clings to an outdated idea of himself. The drug exchange in Las Vegas says everything about where Nick is emotionally. He does not seek out a dealer because he is curious. He does it because something in him has deteriorated enough that crossing that line no longer feels unthinkable. That is a devastating threshold for a character like Nick. It means pain, fear, and pressure have already stripped away the moral resistance that would normally stop him. When the runner returns after Nick hands over a stack of cash, the scene becomes even more ominous. Nick expects drugs. What he does not expect is the additional reward, the bonus that arrives with a smile too casual to be innocent. That extra substance carries the unmistakable scent of setup. Nothing in this world is free, least of all when a man is already compromised. The bonus is not generosity, it is strategy. It is an escalation disguised as convenience. It suggests that someone already knows Nick is vulnerable enough to accept anything that promises relief or an edge. This is where Matt's shadow becomes impossible to ignore. He is moving closer to Nick, not in the loud, impulsive way of a thug looking for a public fight, but in the far more chilling manner of someone who understands that the best attack is the one that begins before the victim knows the assault has started. Matt does not just want confrontation, he wants Nick weakened before confrontation ever arrives. He wants his mind fogged, his reflexes dulled, his judgment distorted, his emotions made unreliable. If he is involved in the dealer arrangement or in the appearance of the extra drug, then this stops being merely a story about addiction and becomes a story about weaponized addiction. That is darker and far more effective because it forces the audience to sit with a painful truth. Sometimes the most successful trap is not the one that creates weakness, but the one that finds existing weakness and sharpens it into a liability. Nick's greatest vulnerability in all of this is not physical dependence alone. It is pride. Pride makes him secretive. Pride makes him dismiss concern as interference. Pride convinces him that admitting the scope of his problem would be more shameful than allowing it to worsen. That is a pattern deeply embedded in the men of this family. They do not collapse gracefully. They hide lash-out bargain with themselves and make increasingly reckless decisions because somewhere in their emotional code vulnerability still feels too close to defeat. Nick may tell himself that he is keeping his options open, that he can still function, that he only needs enough to get through the next day or the next encounter. But every hidden dependency rewires judgment a little more. By the time a man like Nick realizes he has lost control, he usually has already endangered everyone around him. That is what makes Matt's approach so viciously intelligent. If he senses Nick's deteriorating state, he does not need to overpower him physically right away. He only needs to keep him moving deeper into self-sabotage until the inevitable meeting between them tilts heavily in his favor, and Matt clearly does want that meeting. There is something almost ceremonial in the way this threat is building. He does not simply want Nick harmed, he wants him diminished. He wants to see the man hollowed out first, robbed of certainty, perhaps robbed even of memory or balance before delivering whatever final blow he has imagined. Revenge is rarely satisfied with pain alone when humiliation is available. Matt does not want only victory. He wants Nick reduced. At the same time, Sienna is dealing with a different but equally corrosive kind of emotional unraveling. Jealousy is often treated as a smaller emotion in these stories, as if it is merely romantic insecurity or temporary irritation. But jealousy, when grounded in fear and instability, becomes far more complicated. For Sienna, it is not just about another woman or another emotional bond. It is about realizing that the man she depends on emotionally may be drawn into dangers, secrets, and priorities that leave her on the outside. The deeper Adam slips into spider mode and the more the Vegas situation intensifies, the more Sienna may start to feel as if she is losing her place in a reality that is becoming increasingly coded masculine and dangerous. She sees people making decisions behind closed doors, forming covert alliances, chasing enemies, hiding damage, and she is left to interpret fragments, instincts, and silences. That kind of exclusion breeds jealousy because jealousy is often grief wearing sharper clothes. Sienna may envy the power that others seem to have over the situation. She may envy Reese's access, Adam's ease at shapeshifting, even the twisted gravitational pull Matt exerts over the men around him. Most painfully, she may resent the fact that Noah or others might start focusing more on Nick's collapse and Adam's maneuvers than on what she herself is sensing. A woman who can feel danger before others name it often ends up dismissed until events prove her right. That dismissal does damage. It makes her feel invisible, then needy, then angry at herself for becoming needy. I think the fairest way to write Sienna here is not as petty but as emotionally cornered. Her jealousy should not come from vanity. It should come from the unbearable feeling that while everyone else is playing a dangerous game, she is expected to stand still and trust men who are plainly not in control. And Noah, though quieter in this setup, becomes important precisely because he is the bridge between these unraveling worlds. He sees Sienna's emotional strain. He senses Nick's instability. He knows Adam well enough to understand that Spider is not a harmless performance but a high-risk return to a volatile self. Noah is caught between action and restraint, between protecting the people he loves and respecting boundaries that may no longer deserve respect. That is a powerful position for a character because it produces guilt from every angle. If he pushes too hard, he risks alienating those he wants to save. If he waits too long, he may watch the situation become irreversible. The emotional burden of witnessing deterioration without being able to stop it can harden a person. It can also radicalize them. Noah may begin this story trying to keep peace, but peace becomes almost insulting when the people around him are drowning in secrets. The figure of Riza adds another layer of ambiguity that makes the plot feel richer. Whether she is directly connected to Matt or not, her presence is disruptive because she occupies the same seductive territory as Las Vegas itself. She is an invitation to blur lines. Adam's growing closeness to her can be strategic, but strategy is rarely clean when attraction, ego, and adrenaline get involved. Even if Adam tells himself he is only getting close to her to learn the truth, he may start enjoying the intimacy of deception. There is always a risk in undercover emotional games that the player begins to prefer the version of himself who exists inside the lie. If Riza responds more intensely to Spider than to Adam, that creates a deeply destabilizing dynamic. Adam may end up feeling seen not in his healed, disciplined self, but in the part of him that is most dangerous. That kind of validation can intoxicate a person faster than any drug. Meanwhile, Nick's deterioration grows more urgent. The so-called reward substance should not merely worsen his condition physically. It should begin altering his timing, his judgment, perhaps even the way he processes threat. The most frightening version of this story is not one where Nick simply passes out in an alley. It is one where he remains upright long enough to convince himself he is still sharp while his mind is already betraying him in small and catastrophic ways. He becomes angrier, faster, he misreads intentions, he reacts before thinking, he fixates on one goal and loses sight of all others. By the time Matt approaches him, Nick is already halfway into the ambush because the chemicals have quietly made him easier to provoke. This is what makes the prospect of Matt surprising him so terrifying. If Nick is even partially unconscious, disoriented, or chemically impaired, then the danger becomes limitless. Nobody can predict what Matt would do with a helpless Nick except assume it would not stop at intimidation. And this is where the storyline can really become emotionally brutal. Imagine Adam still cloaked in Spider's confidence, getting close enough to real answers to suspect that Matt is about to move, but not quickly enough to stop it cleanly. Imagine Noah sensing that Nick is hiding something severe, but failing to grasp just how compromised he is. Imagine Sienna burning with jealousy and fear, recognizing before anyone else that everything is converging in the worst possible way. The collision becomes inevitable because each person possesses only part of the truth. No one is operating with the full picture, and in thrill-driven soap storytelling that is often the cruelest engine of all. People do not fail because they lack courage. They fail because they are each making decisions based on incomplete reality. Thematically, what holds this arc together is the idea of identity under pressure. Adam becomes Spider because Spider wins. Nick becomes someone unrecognizable because he no longer knows how to bear pain, honestly. Sienna becomes sharper, more suspicious, more emotionally volatile because fear strips away passivity. Matt becomes more dangerous the closer he gets to what he wants because obsession has likely replaced every softer instinct he once had. This is not really a story about good versus evil. It is a story about fracture lines. Some characters are trying to outrun the worst in themselves, while others are actively feeding it. That moral complexity makes the story much more satisfying than a simple cat-and-mouse game. I also think it is only fair to say that Adam's role in all this should not be romanticized too much just because Spider is charismatic. Yes, that side of him is thrilling to watch. Yes, it makes him more effective in dangerous environments. But effectiveness is not the same as health. A man returning to his most manipulative instincts is not necessarily becoming stronger. He may simply be becoming more familiar to himself in the worst way. That distinction matters. If Adam solves part of this crisis by embracing Spider, the victory should come at a cost. He should feel the aftershock of realizing how easily the old persona came back, how natural it felt, how little internal resistance there was once he started winning again. That kind of realization can be more frightening than any outside enemy. The same fairness should apply to Nick. It would be easy to portray him only as a victim once Matt's scheme becomes clearer, but that would flatten the emotional truth. Nick is being targeted, yes, but he is also actively participating in his own downfall. That does not make him unworthy of compassion, it makes him tragic. Tragedy is always strongest when the character's own flaw becomes the opening through which disaster enters. Nick's flaw here is not weakness. It is the refusal to acknowledge weakness until it has already metastasized into danger. He He believes he can manage what is clearly managing him. He thinks secrecy protects dignity when in reality it only isolates him further. I find that painfully believable, and because it is believable, it hurts more.